Robert, are all Muslims terrorists?
Of course not. Come on, let's be serious here. Nobody's saying that. It amazes me that the propaganda machine has repeatedly accused me of saying this. They have to vilify me because they can't refute me because they know that what I'm saying about the Quran and Islam is true. Where does the love of death come from? Very good that you refer to them in this way because they refer to themselves in this way.
You're saying this is not radical interpretation.
Oh,
This
no.
is that jihadism is actually a broad context of the Quran, and this isn't a matter of interpretation.
There is not anything the Islamic Republic of Iran does that is against Islam. We have to stop pretending that it's something other than what it is.
My name is Israel Ellis, and this is the Unfiltered View, a companion to the wake-up call. This is where truth breaks through the noise.
October 7th shattered the illusion that we were safe, that the hatred of the past was behind us. Instead, it revealed a terrifying truth. Anti-Semitism is alive and well, emboldened, and now openly marching through our streets, our campuses, and our institutions. And yet, our governments lack the agency to confront the global jihad and rise in anti-Semitism. This is about a moral collapse of civilization's unwillingness to defend its own values. We are living in a moral reversal of consequence, and history will tell a story about a culture that condemned the victims and excused the murderers. My guest today is someone who has been warning the world about this for decades. Robert Spencer is the director of Jihad Watch, a prolific author and one of the foremost voices on the global threat of radical Islam. We're going to unpack what's really happening, why the world seems to have gone mad, and what we can do about it. I am Israel Ellis, and this is The Unfiltered View, a companion to the wake-up call. Welcome. Robert Spencer, welcome to The Unfiltered View. I have to say to you that I am humbled, I am grateful, I'm in awe of what you've done. I really appreciate that you've joined us today, and I'm sure that you've got a lot of things ongoing. You're what I would call a polymath. You are involved in so many different projects, and you're obviously a highly productive individual with over 30 books, countless articles, and we're going to talk later in the show about your newly released book, Anti-Semitism, History and Myth. So, who is Robert Spencer, and why are you so controversial?
I'm just some guy. Thank you for having me on your show. I had an interest in Islamic jihad and Islam in general. And so after 9/11, some people asked me to write a book about it. I had been consulting on these issues in the 90s. Never thought I'd go public, but, I was asked, I did it. One thing led to another, and here we are. Why am I so controversial? Because there are concerted and ongoing efforts to, instead of answer people who say truths that are unwelcome and unpopular, to discredit and destroy those people by claiming that they're evil and motivated by nefarious goals and so on. And so that's a very well-financed and skillful propaganda campaign that's been going on for many years. The organizations such as the Southern Poverty Law Center and the ADL, they have millions and hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions, and they're taken as objective authorities by a lot of people who are maybe too busy to delve into these issues more deeply. And so they take their word and they smear me and others who call attention to these issues and defame us. And of course, I don't have the money to challenge them in court.
We've been asleep at the wheel. We've been asleep at the wheel. We've allowed all this funding to come into our universities and into our media, and we've ignored it, and we have had no idea. The public has no idea to the extent of the depth of the pockets of countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia and other countries that support the global jihad movement and the rhetoric and the narrative and the educational syllabus. And you know what's ironic is they're using the money, the very money that we enabled them with an opportunity through our consumerism to utilize to sell us their resources so that we can fuel and fund an unprecedented level of consumerism over the last 80 years that really has made these countries extremely wealthy. I mean, wealth that you and I have no idea to the extent of that wealth that is out there. And they have used this money to undermine Western civilization. There is certainly no gratuity over there. So your journey, then the impetus for your journey is 9/11. Would you say that?
No.
Okay.
I was born into a family that was exiled from the Ottoman Empire for declining to convert to Islam. And I was fascinated by that from a very early age and wanted to learn about what had happened and why. And so by the time 9/11 happened, I happened to be one of the few people who was in a position to explain what exactly the motives and goals of the people who carried out the attacks were. So I went public after 9/11, but I've been doing this since the early 80s.
Let's just get right into it because you're that kind of guy, so I know you can do that. Robert, are all Muslims terrorists?
Of course not. Come on. Let's be serious here. Nobody's saying that. It amazes me that the propaganda machine to which I referred earlier has repeatedly accused me of saying this, but I would challenge them to produce even one quotation that comes even close to saying anything like that.
So I have been, in my book and in the interviews that I've done since I've published The Wake Up Call, and I'm outside of my scope. I'm going to tell you right now, I have a political science degree that's 30 years old with a specialty in Middle East politics. I have wrote a couple of other books, and most of my thinking behind my books is a reflection of my experience as a self-made business person. And I have mostly self-empowerment books, like Moving Through Walls was a self-empowerment book. I did not intend to write The Wake Up Call. I came to Israel after October 7th because my son is an IDF soldier. He's a lone soldier from Canada. He's been put on a list, by the way, and hunted by the absolute indecent exposure of Canadian media and along with the complacency and the lack of agency of the Canadian government to legislate laws that pertain to inciting hatred and doing these indecent acts. But that's besides the point. We went to Israel after October 7th because many people were asking me the question of how did this happen? And one night I got up in a cold sweat when my son was probably deployed either in Lebanon at the time and then later in Gaza and he served as a reservist. He served over 300 days, God bless him, along with all the other wonderful men and women that we have serving in the IDF. And that day I had gone from the border of Gaza and I walked to the kibbutz Be'eri, and I wanted to see how far of a distance it was for the terrorists that invaded on October 7th. And that night I started writing a book. I started trying to answer the question of how. So it's a long way of telling you that I really don't have anywhere near, I can't even light a candle to your experience and to what you've accomplished in this space. But back to are all Muslims terrorists is, I agree with you. I mean, that is that is an off-the-cuff remark. And certainly we've heard the term, well, maybe not all Muslims are terrorists, but we can definitely, say that all terrorists are Muslims. And this type of rhetoric, I feel, plays into it. And in my book, I've tried to say there is a difference between that jihadists are the lovers of death, and they present a threat to all Muslims, to all Christians, to all Jews. And I have been criticized because I have brought up sections in the Quran of the surahs that do not necessarily justify or rationalize the idea or okay or give the green light to the okay of the idea of specifically killing Jews. Like any other ancient document, there's subject to interpretation. But I have to believe this, Robert, and this is the thing that I'm dealing with. There are 2 billion Muslims in the world. I mean, that I don't know if that number is accurate or if it's an approximation number. What would that correct number be?
About 1.3 billion.
Oh, sorry, 1.3 billion. Okay, it's a lot of zeros. It's a lot of people, and Jews would represent a fraction of that number. How many Jews are in the world?
About 18 million. Is that right?
Okay, I don't know, but at last count, I mean, there's
I
a
think
lot of,
that's about it.
I can tell you, if there's 18 million Jews, there's 18 million different opinions out there. And that's why it's really hard to get things done sometimes. But the thing is that, I know that Canada in the Liberal loss recently is really attributed to the fact that Muslims have made it past that 5.8% mark in Canada through the immigration policies of the former Trudeau government, another useful idiot out there. So here's my point. We've got a considerable number of Muslims out there, and the question is, how are we going to come to the table? How are we going to come on to the table with them? How do we position ourselves so we do not alienate moderate Muslims? I want to believe that there are lovers of life among the Muslims. And the question is this, Robert, and this is what I'm going to ask you, and this is why I have taken more of a moderate view, because, hey, you're not going to go ahead and, speak of all Muslims in one way. I talk about jihadists as people who have manipulated and bastardized the Quran for their own purpose of subjugation and genocide. They don't even want to enslave the Jews. They want a complete genocide of the Jews. And so my point is this. The question is this. How should we approach the controversy of jihadism without alienating and antagonizing the 1.8 billion Muslims in this world?
All right, look, there are a whole lot of things in what you said here. Many, many, many things. One of them seems to be a bedrock assumption, correct me if I'm wrong, that you think that the Quran, properly understood, teaches peace and coexistence and mutual respect, and thus the jihadis are misusing it. And thus, how can we confront their misuse of it while not alienating the Muslims who don't adhere to that misunderstanding of Islam? Is that correct?
You are so much more eloquent than I am, but I would say absolutely. I would say that would be.
I don't know about that at all. I'm not. One thing I could say, I suppose, is that I've been doing this for 100 years and I've heard all these things. Are you aware, when you said at the beginning of your statement just now that there's Hamas and so on that are lovers of death? Where does the love of death come from? Or do you know?
Well, I would say that when I call them lovers of death, I've created that for my own purposes of my own writing, the terminology to describe the idea that the political term of MAD, mutually assured destruction, is something that we have used in our conflict, in the East and West conflict, and what we've kind of grown up with. The idea is that you can always negotiate with the other side when the predominant purpose behind everybody ultimately is the goal of survival. When, as you two would say, the Russians love their children too. However, the difference with this is that Hamas clearly doesn't love their children. Hamas is all about the lovers of death. And yet, Western civilization is so disillusioned that they continue to apply the idea, the rationale of diplomacy, thinking that they can negotiate with them. You cannot negotiate with these people. These people, they'll tell you whatever they want to tell you. They're committed to meet their 72 virgins. And it really, sorry?
Where'd they get that idea?
Where did they, go ahead.
Okay. First thing, the lovers of death. It's very good that you refer to them in this way, because they refer to themselves in this way. I don't know if you're aware of that. I don't mean to assume, but it seemed like when I asked you the question, where does that come from? You answered it was something that you had coined. I don't know if you're aware, but jihadis have frequently said over the years, we will win because we love death more than you love life. This is something many, many jihadis in many different contexts have affirmed. One of them was Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the Boston Marathon bomber. Nigerian, the Boko Haram leader, Abu Bakr Shekau, who is now dead. He said the same thing. It's something that is very frequently said by Islamic jihadis all over the world. And it comes from the Quran, chapter 62, verse 6, which says, "Say, O you who are Jews, if you claim that you are favored of Allah apart from mankind, then long for death if you are truthful." Okay, let me read that again. "Say, O you who are Jews, if you claim that you are favored of Allah apart from mankind, then long for death if you are truthful." So if the Jews claim, I mean, this is obviously a reference to the idea of the Jews being the chosen people of God. If they claim that, the Quran is challenging them and saying, you can only claim to be the chosen people of God if you love death. Because the underlying idea is that you will prefer life with Allah in paradise to life on this earth. And the jihadis understand that, and they think that when we kill Jews and we are killed in the process, we are gaining hold of the guarantee of paradise in chapter 9, verse 111 of the Quran, which says that paradise is, well, I will read it exactly so that there's no misunderstanding. It's chapter 9, verse 111. As I said, give me just a moment to get there. And indeed, Allah has bought from the believers their lives and their wealth, because the garden, that is paradise, will be theirs. They will fight in the way of Allah and will kill and be killed. So the way to paradise, that's the only guarantee of paradise in the Quran. And the way to paradise is to kill and be killed in the process, which is why there's suicide bombing. So you ask me, how can we not alienate moderate Muslims? Now, in the first place, can we define our terms here? You seem to be assuming that the jihadis' understanding of the Quran is not correct and is not mainstream Islamic tradition. My contention is just the opposite, that the jihadis' understanding of the Quran is obviously not the only one, but it is a very deeply entrenched mainstream and indeed dominant Islamic tradition. And consequently, when we talk about moderate Muslims, we have to understand what we're talking about. Are you talking about people who have a different understanding of the Quran and Islam in general altogether, as if we're talking about Reform and conservative and Orthodox Jews, and there are jihadi Muslims and non-jihadi like Baptists and Presbyterians and Episcopalians in Christianity? Or are you meaning that they just don't do it? That whatever the Quran may say about killing and being killed and about loving death, maybe they just don't do it. They have other things to do. They have other priorities on their minds. They have other things they'd like to accomplish on this earth, and so they don't do it. So and that is the big question. People throw this term moderate around. Let's define it first. Do we mean that they know, in other words, that the Quran teaches these things and they reject them? Or do they don't believe that the Quran teaches these things in the first place? This is a very important distinction. That's why I'm asking. I'll explain.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important, but at the same time, we're talking about ancient text. Okay, so I want to just come back to something, because there's two things I want to just counter with you, and really this is from a point of learning. First of all, in the Hebrew Torah, we've got a phrase that says "an eye for an eye," but any rabbi of even the most religious extreme sect will come up and say that the Torah is not a verbatim in terms of words, that it is subject to interpretation, that every word means something in the Torah that was delivered. And an eye for an eye does not mean that you poke out someone's eye. It is a matter of compensation. There is a process of determining value, but it is not the literal meaning of the term. And so the first thing I want to say is that there may be things that are written in the Quran, and that the delineation between moderate and sort of extremism is the fact that in moderate Islam, they believe perhaps in some level of interpretation. But the other conflict that I've got with what you're saying, and I'm just trying to find it quickly in my own book, but there are several surahs within the Quran that actually talk about the importance of how to do battle, or that, you're not allowed to go to battle. You're not allowed to kill. The idea of coexistence with the deities.
Okay, find those. I'll wait.
No, okay. I'm gonna get them. Aviv, you're listening. Give me the page. But the thing is that I do find, and maybe this is the fault of my own research, but the fact is that I'm trying to find liturgy that, shows, and I guess I want to believe that the jihadists have corrupted the Quran. I want to believe that in today's modern... Sorry?
I understand wanting to believe it, but that doesn't make it so.
No, it does not. But there are verses. There are verses that are okay. We'll find a second. There are verses directly in the Quran. So here we go. So 68. Allah does not forbid you from those who do not fight you because of religion and do not expel you from your homes, from being righteous towards them and acting justly toward them. Indeed, Allah loved those who act justly. And Surah 262. Indeed, those who believed and those who were Jews or Christians or Sabians, those among them who believed in Allah and the last day and did righteousness will have their reward with the Lord, and no fear will there be concerning them, nor will they grieve. Okay? And then in 3.384, say, we have believed in Allah, and that has been revealed to us, and what has been revealed to Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, and the descendants, and what was given to Moses and Jesus, and what was given to the prophets from their Lord, we make no distinction between any of them. We are Muslims in submission to him. So these texts, and this is just, from what I have interpreted or what I've read, to me, these texts imply fairness, respect, and common heritage, and there is no justification in these texts for violence. So there may be other texts that deal with violence, but the point is, what I'm saying is that they are using the Quran as an excuse for their own murderous activities, and these zealots of Islam are not the true believers they claim to be. The party of terror are the true infidels, hiding under the cover of hate and personal gain through political power and conquest. Okay. So, yeah, please, educate me.
Well, I was... Okay, and there's a whole awful lot here. In the first place, I was going to say that you drew an analogy with the Jewish tradition and how the literal understanding is not necessarily paramount. And I think that that's always a temptation for people of other traditions when they confront the Quran and Islam, to look at it, to assume that Muslims look at it the way they look at their own scriptures. But that's not necessarily so. I would prefer, I think that it would be more prudent to take the Quran the way Muslims take it, and to read the tafsir, the commentaries on the Quran written by Muslims, and understand how Islamic tradition has understood these passages. I would also like to point out that while I am talking about loving death, the loving death passage, and kill and be killed, the two passages that I cited, you started talking about interpretative traditions, but when it came to the ones that you quoted, there was no talk of interpretative traditions, and you were taking them to mean at face value what you think that they mean. in all cases, I would suggest that it is a better path, a wiser path to understand Islam, to take Islam on its own terms and to go to the mainstream Sunni tafsir, which are dominant in the Islamic world, such as Tafsir al-Jalalain, Ibn Kathir, Qurtubi, even Maududi and Qutb, to understand how these passages are seen in general in the Islamic world. Now, of course, it's perfectly reasonable to say that's not unanimous, but we shouldn't also kid ourselves about what's mainstream. And
So,
the fact is that there's so many things here. If I could just try to sketch out a few responses before we go on, I'd be grateful. The
please.
passage, for example, from chapter 2, 62, 63, that is about the Jews, the Christians, and the Sabaeans being in paradise and so on. All of the commentators, all of the mainstream Sunni commentators, with the sole exception of some modern Western commentators who do not have roots in the tradition, say that this is referring to the Jews and the Christians and the Sabaeans who become Muslims, and that the distinction is between what are called the believers among the people of the book and the non-believers among the people of the book. The believers among the people of the book are the Jews, Christians, and Sabaeans who become Muslims. The non-believers among the people of the book are the Jews and Christians who are still Jews and Christians.
So you're
And
saying
they are called in
you're saying
chapter
that they
19.
have to convert in order to
Yeah.
be spared death. They have to convert.
You convert, you'll be great. But in chapter 98, verse 6, it says, the unbelievers among the people of the book are the most vile of created beings. That is the worst of all creatures, which is another translation of the same passage. And so that's very different from the Irenic idea that the Quran is multicultural and tolerant and ecumenical and allows for all these people of different traditions to maintain their traditions and attain paradise. There's actually no sect of Islam and no school of jurisprudence that says that anybody but Muslims are in paradise. There are no Jews and Christians there except those that have converted to Islam.
So I have to ask you the question, Robert, based on what you're saying, is Islam, and I don't know if I can say synonymously with the Quran, is it inherently anti-Semitic?
Oh, of course it is. As a matter of fact, not only is it inherently anti-Semitic, but ironically, right after, are you aware? Let me go there. Sorry, I'm dropping things left and right here today. Chapter 2, the cow, the longest and most important chapter of the Quran. And that passage we were just talking about is at verse 62. And it says, indeed, those who believe and those who are Jews and Christians and Sabaeans, whoever believes in Allah in the last day and does right, surely their reward is with their Lord. And I just wanted to note that since I was talking about it, you don't have to take my word for it. I have here, for example, Qurtubi says, this is about those who believe in the Prophet, that is Muhammad, peace be upon him, and who are firm in belief. So it only applies to Jews, Christians, and Sabaeans who accept Islam. Anyway, it goes on. What's the next verse? The next verse after that, and when we made a covenant with you and caused the mountain to tower above you, hold fast to what we have given you and remember what is in it so that you may fear Allah. Then, even after that, you turned away. And if it had not been for the grace of Allah and his mercy, you would have been among the losers. And you know about those among you who broke the Sabbath, how we said to them, be apes, despised and hated. And we made it an example to their own generation and to succeeding ones, and a warning to those who fear Allah. So, even to this day, you have jihadis calling the Jews in Israel the sons of apes and pigs. The pigs come in other chapters 5, 59, and 60, and 7, 166. And so you have the dehumanization of the Jews and Israelis in particular being based specifically on the Quran, right after it says this apparently generous statement about Jews going to paradise, it says, those who broke the Sabbath, we turn them into apes. And this is something that's, there are actually discussions among Islamic clerics throughout history.
Neil Kressel.
Literal
Neil
apes or
Neil,
figurative
yeah.
apes. But nonetheless, either way, it's not so odd.
So there is a book out there by the Sons of Pigs and Apes, Muslim Anti-Semitism, The Conspiracy of Science by Neil Kressel. Are you aware of his works?
No. Never heard of them.
Great author, a friend of my son's. He's the dad of a friend of my son's, and very impressive. But when you talked about that phraseology of the Sons of Pigs and Apes, so what do you say, Robert? Are you saying that Islam in itself and the 1.8 billion Muslims, if they were to be religiously adhering to the words of the Quran, that it rationalizes them to be anti-Semites, that their actions against Israel or against the Jews are in fact rationalized and justified, are not a corruption of the Quran, but in fact is the direction of their religiosity, their observance of the Quran?
Yep.
That's scary.
It is what it is. We have to be realistic and deal with the threat as it actually exists and not pretend that it's something else. This is a very great temptation people have because they want to be able to sleep at night and think that they can look out from their houses out onto their nice lawns and that they don't have anything to worry about. But we need to be realistic about this. Now, you did say however many Muslims you want to say, then that actually is a question that's much in dispute. Because Islam has a death penalty for apostasy, it's not at all clear how many real Muslims there really are. Because a lot of people leave Islam and they don't say anything to anybody because they don't want to get killed. But anyway, that's a tangent. The fact is that there are many Muslims who do not take these things seriously. There are, in other words, moderate Muslims in the sense that there are people who they may know all that's in there, but they have other priorities and other outlooks in life, just as there are Jews and Christians and Hindus and Buddhists who know what's in the book, but they don't care, or they care more about other things, or they don't know what's in the book and they don't care. But if you ask them, they'll still say, oh, yes, I'm Jew, or I'm a Christian, or I'm a Buddhist, or whatever.
So my son and I, we've had conversations about this, and I really love this one thing that he said. He says, Dad, there's no Allah when you own a Bugatti. And I think that's
not the case. Remember, Osama bin Laden was a very rich man. Right. And so also, I can give you so many examples. You can go to my website, jihadwatch.org, actually. I used to have a recurring theme of poverty causes terrorism, because people often contend that it is poverty and lack of education that leads to the desperation that causes people to strike out by becoming terrorists. And so I had an ongoing list of jihad terrorists who were quite wealthy and well-educated, who read the Quran, believed the Quran, decided to act upon the Quran, and went out and killed people.
So they shouldn't really vilify you. I mean, you're standing up and you're saying to them, hey, this is, you're mainstream. You're not some extreme sect.
But you understand, they have to vilify me because they can't refute me, because they know that what I'm saying about the Quran and Islam is true. And so in order to keep people ignorant and complacent, they have to lie about me and say that I'm some frothing at the mouth, hate monger, throwing bombs and lying and misrepresenting the Quran. Just recently, I was included against my will, but you know how things come in the email. So I get this email to 300 people. I hate those. And I'm one of the 300 people. And it's these Hindu groups and Muslims, and they're yelling at each other because of the Pahalgam attack that Pakistan was behind in India.
I saw your YouTube, your podcast on that.
I don't even remember, but anyway, that's okay. The fact is that these Muslims are in this email, and they're saying all the usual things, that Islam doesn't justify, Islam condemns, this is all against Islam, and so on. And so I quoted some of the salient passages of the Quran in response. And then I get back, oh, Spencer, he's a terrible bigot. He's hateful. He's evil. He's everything else. He eats babies for breakfast.
Because you're making them aware of
But
what
they
is in
can't
fact
answer-
intrinsic
Look,
to them.
they can't say, oh, that's wrong. That's not in the Quran. They can't say those are the passages that they can't refute the fact that the jihadis go to those passages to justify their actions. They can't say I'm lying. They can't say I'm wrong. So they just say I'm evil and hope that people will turn away.
Is that you think Iran's rationalization, the Khomeini, the Ayatollah, is that? I mean, he's got to be the ultimate jihadist.
Well, think about why does Iran hate Israel? They don't have a common border. Israel isn't attacking Iran. Israel isn't threatening Iran's economic interests. There is no conceivable justification for Iran's relentless hostility toward Israel, except Islam. It's only
So you think so you're telling me, you're saying right here now, this is really scary stuff actually, because you're saying this is not radical interpretation.
Oh,
This
no.
is that jihadism is actually a broad context of the Quran. And this isn't a matter of interpretation. It's right there, and that the commentary is supporting it. And that a country like Iran, run by the Ayatollahs, an extreme sect of Muslim, which I do not know, or I'm trying not to consider that it represents all of Persians, but
They're Twelver Shiites. Twelver Shiism is a venerable tradition. It's not a sect, some kind of crazy sect. There've been Twelver Shiites since the beginning of Islam, or at least since the 12 Imams lived. The last 12th Imam died in 874. So at 1,200 years, this sect has been around. It's not some crazy invention of the Ayatollah Khomeini.
Okay, I got that. But the fact is that their war on America and Israel being the first line of defense really is not about some geopolitical game. This is purely about their adherence to their beliefs and to their religion.
Yeah, you got to hand it to them. They're an Islamic republic, and they have been consistent about that. There is not anything the Islamic Republic of Iran does that is against Islam. There is no practice that you can show me that violates Quranic tenets. That is something that the Islamic Republic of Iran.
And yet, and this is the most disturbing thing that I've seen a lot of disturbing things in the last few weeks from our president, from the president of the United States. But now negotiating with these guys, I mean,
well, he ain't listening to me, but I would have advised him not to do that, because he obviously does not know, and nobody in the West knows. John Kerry didn't know when he was making the first Iran deal with Iran during the Obama administration. Nobody knows this. But do you know about taqiyya?
No, go ahead.
Taqiyya is religious deception, and it's founded on the Quran, chapter 3, verse 28.
I was just about to say that the pragmatic reality here is that you're dealing with a partner in bad faith, and that these guys are going to tell you absolutely anything that you want to hear to continue forward, so that they can get to a place where they are a formidable foe. And
yes, they're a partner in bad faith.
They're steps away from a nuclear bomb.
And it's because of their Islam that they are a partner in bad faith. I think that's an important point, because they're not going to be the only ones. And yet nobody understands this. So I was going to explain, if you would allow me, I think this is an important point. Chapter 3, verse 28 of the Quran says, "Do not take the unbelievers as your friends and protectors in preference to believers. Whoever does this has nothing to do with Allah, unless you are doing it to guard yourselves against them." And even the Sunni commentators on that passage say that bit about unless you're doing it to guard yourselves against them, it means that you pretend to be the friend of your enemies to gain an advantage over them, to make them complacent so you can get close enough to kill them. There are examples of this in the life of Muhammad. And now, Shiite Islam is 10 to 15% of the Muslims worldwide. The Sunnis and the Shiites consider each other heretics and thus to be killed. So the Sunnis, because there's so many more of them, have killed Shiites throughout history. So the Shiites elaborated that passage of the Quran as a whole doctrine of Shiite Islam called taqiyya, concealment. There's also a hat you can wear that's a taqiyya because it conceals your bald spot, or mine anyway. And chapter 3, verse 28 becomes the foundation of this whole doctrinal edifice that is the cornerstone of Shiite Islam, that's basically lying. That you lie to the Shiite Sunnis so you can protect yourselves. You lie to the unbelievers so that you make them complacent. And this is Jafar as-Sadiq, the sixth Imam of the 12. He said, if you're not practicing taqiyya, you're not a Muslim. This is a central foundational idea. It's not fringe. It's not extremist. It's not misunderstood or misinterpreted. It's central to Shiite
So you're
Islam.
saying that all agreements, hold on a second, Robert, you're saying that all agreements that we've entered into with Muslim countries are a deceiving, an act of deception?
Yeah, I'm saying that. Because
I'm going to tell you
idea. And I'll tell you, I can tell you about that. But the thing is, when you're talking about Shiite Islam in particular, this is a central notion. We would be naive in the extreme to think these people are on the level with us when it's a core element of the doctrine that is the foundation of their state to deceive us.
Look, and I'm not disagreeing with you, Robert, because the proof is in the pudding. Every agreement, the 14 agreements prior to October 7th that Israel negotiated with Hamas all ended in failure. And what really upsets me and what's really frustrating to me is the disillusionment by our leadership, both in Israel and in America. I cannot believe that Trump, who's losing credibility with me by the day, who said that if those hostages aren't released right away, there's going to be all hell to pay. He did not do that. And then he said he delivered the bunker buster bombs to Israel to do the deed that had to be done. He said that these guys have to be taken out. He keeps on taking the red line and pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And he's doing precisely what former presidents that he has vilified, that he is, really dragged out there in the public square. And he's doing exactly what they've done. He's saying, I'm now going to negotiate with Iran. He is a disillusioned egoist when he thinks that, and he is completely missing the point. So I will not argue with you there that deception is a key player. However, it is scary to assume then, and I want to ask you this. So are you telling me that the Abraham Accords, that the agreement we have that Israel has with Egypt and Jordan, the agreement with Egypt and Jordan are more sort of strategic from a sense of military peace defensive, but what about the Abraham Accords, which is all about cooperation and acceptance and recognition? Is that a deceptive play on them, or is it actually a sincere gesture? Is it a more modernist approach? How does that play into all this?
We have to make some more distinctions here. Egypt and Jordan and the countries that have entered into the Abraham Accords so far are not Islamic states and not ruled by Islamic law. So it's very different from making an agreement with one of them than it would be if Saudi Arabia ever did join the Abraham Accords. But ultimately, the reasoning, even if Saudi did join, the reasoning would be the same. It's pragmatic. It's not religious. It's pragmatic based on the fact that they all have a shared enemy in Iran. If the Islamic Republic were to fall, the Abraham Accords will fall, because each one of those governments, although it is not an Islamic state, it is a majority Muslim state, and they've got a lot of true believers in each one of those countries. And they think the Abraham Accords are terrible because they're against Islam, and they want them gone. And so as soon as the pragmatic reason for the Accords is gone, the Accords will be gone. As soon as
So
Egypt
I
doesn't
want I
need
want to
billion,
come back to this. This is a very important point,
yeah,
Robert. You just made a point. I'm sorry. You made a point. You said as soon as the Iranian regime would fall, that the Abraham Accords would also fall.
yeah.
So are you saying that these are still sworn enemies of Israel?
Well, ultimately, but not really, because like I said, they're not Islamic states. So, insofar as they are not ruled by Islamic law, then they're not necessarily sworn enemies of Israel. However, they can't be pals with Israel, friends with Israel, allies with Israel on some lasting basis without risking getting overthrown by the people in their countries who are true believers and who believe that such an accord, an alliance would be wrong on the basis of Islam. And so these accords will last while everybody's threatened by Iran. But if you take that away as the raison d'etre for the accords, the accords will fall as well. And this is because of the pressure that the Egyptian government, the Jordanian government, the Bahrainis, the UAE, they're all under pressure from hardliners in their own countries all the time as it is. And these people will not stand for them saying, okay, now we're friends with Israel. We're going to have a lasting friendly alliance as equals. They would lose their governments if they did that. And they
I didn't
know
want to. I wasn't thinking of getting into this, but I'd be interested in your opinion. So, Iranian, somehow we never get to a deal, which Trump will not get to a deal. We get frustrated, and they unseat the Khomeini regime, the Islamic regime. Do you think, my first part of the question is, do you think that's even possible? Do you think that there is a military answer or there is a opportunity to unseat the current power of the under the Islamic regime of Iran? And what will happen in the wake of the vacuum of power?
Oh, that's very possible. Absolutely. The Islamic Republic should have fallen already. It probably would have if Joe Biden hadn't given them at least $20 billion. And he did that after October 7th. And so we owe the war against Israel to Joe Biden and his people that were running it. And so, like you say, I mean, I share your frustration with Trump. But the fact is that at the end of the first Trump administration, the Islamic Republic was teetering and could have fallen. And it's widely hated by its own people. And Biden propped it up. And will it fall if there's another push? It very well could.
Is Islam an ideology
Of
or a
course.
religion?
It's both. This is something there's so much misunderstanding and false assumptions on this issue. And one of the primary ones is that it's a religion like Judaism and Christianity are religions in the West today. That is not the case. It is political as much as it is religious. The political is inseparable from Islam. Why is every flag, not every flag, but why are so many flags of Islamic countries green?
Go ahead.
Because it's a perpetual springtime. The springtime means Islam is always growing. That's not just growing like people are converting to Islam. That means the territory, the Dar al-Islam, has to grow at the expense of the Dar al-Harb. The Dar al-Harb being the house of war that are non-Muslim countries.
What is the key difference between ideology and religious?
Well, a religion purports to relate mankind to the divine. And an ideology is an understanding of the world through which people look at the world and that makes sense of it for them. And of course, there are competing ideologies just as there are competing religions. But Islam is both. Islam is a political system as well as a religious one.
Recently, with discussions to do with Hamas and the complete destruction of Hamas, the retort to me is you can kill Hamas, but you can't kill an ideology.
That's right.
Do you think
will grow up after Hamas.
Is there a way to kill an ideology?
Well, probably people thought that National Socialism was dead in Berlin in May 1945. And yet nowadays I see Tucker Carlson giving a platform to a historian who's repeating National Socialist talking points from the war. And so the ideology is not dead. It's still out there. And every now and then, you noted at the beginning, I wrote a book about anti-Semitism. And every now and then, if I write about it on Twitter, all these National Socialists come at me. And I think, and they got SS in their little Twitter photos and all that. And so, no, you can't kill an ideology.
We're going to come to that in a second. We're going to come to your book because I really want to talk about it. But I want to just, kind of continue along this momentum with respect to the ideology, because the ideology is not just exclusive to places like the Shiite, like the Islamic regime of Iran.
That's because it's mainstream in Islam.
But it's also become mainstream in America. It's come through through the funding of, since, and this is the irony, and help me explain this. Help me understand this. If 3 planes destroyed 2 towering examples of capitalism and what democracy is all about, the terrible tragedy of 9/11 with visions, I still have in my mind, I'm sure we all do, those scenes of people jumping from burning buildings to their deaths, nowhere else to go, the destruction, the mayhem that followed. And yet, this is really the ultimate irony, I think. And yet, it wasn't too long until narratives like sensitivities around Islamophobia and the reversal of victimization. And I'm like, dude, how do you go there? How do you go from people attacking you, taking down your towers of success, killing 3,500 people on your soil, making a coordinated attack over here, one of the worst tragedies, one of the worst terrorist attacks on Western civilization in modern times, and within a few short years, people are talking sensitivity with regards to, don't talk badly about the Islamic people. Don't say anything. Don't accuse them of this. Don't accuse them of that. Hey, I'm not saying that that it's okay to profile or to discriminate. That's not the way of life. That's not how we've been raised. But the liberal movement has gone completely, bizarrely, right, to the other side of the spectrum, and has allowed, and through this, and I can't understand how people have allowed it either. I just can't get it, and I'll never get it. But it, to me, and you say that, since 9/11, when you started writing about this is the biggest mystery for me, is how we could allow this reversal, this counter engineering of the victimization of the way the attack on Western civilization, which was obviously the appetizer of the introduction of global jihad, leading right up to where we are today, which is the entree being served on a golden platter. And yet we're still marching in the streets. We're still tolerating these protests and these encampments and this bizarre insanity of self-destruction of our way of life through the allowance of the infusion of global jihad right into our society. And I can't understand it, Robert.
Well, it started 6 days. It didn't take 2 years. It started 6 days after 9/11. On September 17th, 2001, George W. Bush went to the mosque in Washington, D.C., in company of leaders who were jihadis, who were connected to jihad groups. Abdurrahman al-Amoudi was the president of the American Muslim Council, the largest so-called moderate Islamic group in the country at that time, and he is now in prison for financing al-Qaeda. And George W. went with him and Nihad Awad of the Council on American Islamic Relations, which has been established by the Justice Department as being linked to Hamas, funding Hamas through the Holy Land Foundation, which was the largest Islamic charity in the United States at one time and has been shut down for funding Hamas, named the Council on American Islamic Relations, named an unindicted co-conspirator in that Holy Land Foundation trial. Bush goes with Al-Amudi, an Al-Qaeda funder, and Awad, who's Hamas, and he goes in to the mosque in Washington, D.C., September 17th, 2001, and he said, Islam is peace. This has nothing to do with Islam. If you see women who wear hijab, they're being harassed and their hijabs ripped off, this is not who we are as Americans, and that's true. Nobody should do that. That's stupid, boorish, evil behavior. But the fact is that that's what he thought needed emphasizing 6 days after 9/11, was that we should be kind. Muslims are suffering from Islamophobia, and we should not be mean to them, which is granted, absolutely, but that Islam was peace and had nothing to do with this terrorist attack. And that completely hamstrung the ability of U.S. government and U.S. society to come to grips with this and deal with it realistically. Because the fact is that the jihadis themselves, once again, read Muhammad Atta's letter from the September 10th that he wrote to himself to get all fired up. Read anything from the surviving plotters like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Ramzi bin al-Shibs. Their letter to the U.S. government is on my Jihad Watch website. Read anything connected to the 9/11 attacks, and you'll see they always go back to Islam. The first thing we are calling you to is Islam. Osama bin Laden said that in his fatwa against the United States. And so this is all about Islam. They tell us it's all about Islam. And the first thing that the U.S. president said was, this has nothing to do with Islam. And it's the same thing with October 7th. It's the same thing with the Israeli government. Everybody is in denial and afraid to face what we're dealing with here. And so they keep coming up with wrong solutions about how to deal with it. And when you apply the wrong remedy, it's just like if I say, gee, my head hurts. I have such a headache. And it's because I have a brain tumor. So I take a couple of aspirin and then I think, why didn't my headache go away? Well, it's because I'm applying the wrong remedy for the problem. And that's where we are.
It is frustrating. And would you agree and disagree that we are in an impossible situation? And the impossibility of our situation is created by our own moral compass, our own need to protect democracy, freedom of speech, civil liberties. How do you?
Well, to some degree, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
but this is, back to the deception. Okay, the global jihad uses and manipulates everything to do with the very things that uphold the Western civilization, democracy, freedom of speech, civil liberties, the idea that in order to counter global jihad, we need to go against everything we believe. And so there are people that will rather die on the sword than go down that route. And this is where America becomes divided. This is the polarization between everything, because there is the reality. And you want to talk about pragmatic reality? We've got an educational situation, an educational institution that goes right in, that is infected right into kindergarten, where there isn't a subject there isn't a school or a subject that doesn't carry anti-Semitic overtures and narratives now within it. York University in Toronto sent out a memo from their union to their teachers and their teachers' assistants saying that they must, in every class, regardless of the class, they must announce the Zionist occupation, colonization, genocide. They must talk about it in their classes. It could be a class on statistics. And not only that, but they offered legal help for anyone who is called out on it or would have any problems with it. And the fact is that in every part of our educational institutions, we are institutionalizing and normalizing the idea of anti-Semitism. And the question I've got is, what are we going to do about that? I think that the only nonviolent approach, and this is what I talk about, the only nonviolent approach to reverse the tidings of global jihad, which is going to result 20 to 30 years from now. I mean, Europe might fall sooner, but the West, America's, I want to talk to you about where you think it's going to be in 25 years. But if we don't do something now, and in order to do something, we're going to have to create legislation that is going to go against everything we believe in, because we're going to have to dictate, we're going to have to define what is incitement to hatred, we're going to have to define what is acceptable, not acceptable, and we're going to have to execute upon that. And as we know what happened with McCarthyism and what has happened in the States, like everything ends up becoming out of control. But if we do not, if we do not want a violent situation in order to oppose this, we're going to have to face the reality and inject ourselves into the educational system. Would you agree that the dismantling of the syllabus of hate starts with our educational system? And how do you see that happening?
Well, the educational system is dominated by people of a particular ideology, and so that has to be changed. But I don't agree that we have to discard any of our own principles or the principles of free societies in order to meet this challenge. I do very strongly insist that we have to deal with it realistically. We have to stop pretending that it's something other than what it is. But as far as the educational system goes, there's been the long march through the institutions of the left since the 1960s. And so every professor, every secondary school teacher, pretty much every teacher at every level now shares the far left point of view, the neo-Marxist point of view, which hates Israel because they're collectivists, they're socialist internationalists, and they don't like the idea of a particular state for a particular people that is not inclined to assimilate into the larger collective. And so they will always be hostile to Israel and want to destroy it. If we take the educational systems out of the hands of the left and demand that they're not going to get, in the first place, we can do this by saying that they're not going to get any government funding, any local funding, whatever, if they don't allow for opposing points of view, if they demonize all other points of view and only allow for one. And that would be at least a first step. But I don't see any reason why we have to stop being free societies to fight this. We need to speak about it realistically, to be sure, and clear up some confusion. Like, for example, there was a case in Detroit a few years back of a couple of Muslim doctors who were put on trial for female genital mutilation. Now, female genital mutilation is a tenet of Islam, and they made their defense that it was a tenet of Islam. And it's a symptom of the ridiculous fantasies that dominate our age, that it had been routinely denied in the establishment press for years that female genital mutilation had anything to do with Islam. I was very used to seeing stories about it and seeing the obligatory paragraph saying, this has nothing to do with Islam, it's a cultural custom. And then these two doctors made their defense all about Islam and saying that they were just carrying out the teachings of their religion. And a judge, he agreed, and he threw out the case against them, saying we can't infringe upon their freedom of religion. Well, it seems to me that just as the United States delineated that polygamy was illegal, even though the Mormon religion allowed for it, and did not allow Utah, which was dominated by Mormons, to become a state in the 1890s until they outlawed polygamy, and the Mormon church forbade polygamy. In the same way, we have to say to the Islamic groups, you're perfectly free to practice your religion. You can pray to Allah and read your Quran and all that, all you want, but you cannot do these things that contravene our own understanding in the West, which is not based on Islam, of human rights. And female genital mutilation is right out, as is jihad, as is trying to overthrow the government and install Sharia, and so on and so on, and then prosecute on that basis.
I think that I still think that there isn't a strong enough agency from government. I mean, certain things, certainly like female mutilation, is going to cross that line, but there's still the underpinning and underlying sort of anti-Semitic sentiment out there that is infused within our educational system. And I think that a lot of that comes from the fact that we've accepted that the liberal movement was pretty well bankrupt. And we allowed all this money to flow into our educational systems. And one of the things that I believe that I posit must happen is we cannot allow foreign funding of our educational systems. We cannot especially allow foreign funding from sources that don't adhere to the same principles of America, of the democracy, of the system, of the way of life that we present. I think ultimately that, I mean, even though like in Colombia, right, in 2011, in an interview said, that no, none of this funding coming from Qatar is going to affect our educational syllabus in our curriculum. And of course, we know what's happened there. So I believe that one of the things that needs to happen is that all of the funding from any sources of funding, I mean, money, it just says it all. You just said it about what happened, what Biden did. He basically gave the green light and the ticket for Iran to do what it's doing, and the war in Israel and the support of Hamas. All that is money. I think the source of money, we talk about money laundering. Every time I make an investment, I got to fill out a money laundering, anti-money laundering declaration. Why is it that our educational institutions do not have to declare that money is coming from countries that do agree with the mutilation of women? And I feel like this is, again, the dissonance of our society and what we're living in. But certainly I feel that one of the things that we need to do is we need to stop the funding from countries that do not agree with us, because ultimately there's just no way that you're going to be able to change the narrative unless you start funding it yourself. And I think that's part of the problem. The other interesting, we talk about the Marxisms, and we talk about all the things. The irony, of course, is that Karl Marx was Jewish. We talk about genocide. Genocide was coined by Raphael Lemkin, another Jew. We talk about the idea of what defines a refugee today, another Jewish person that came up with this. It seems as Jews, we get ourselves in a lot of trouble with these. With our intellectual,
are you aware of Karl Marx?
Sorry?
Are you aware of Karl Marx's treatise on the Jews?
Well, granted, he might be I'm not. I'm just pointing out to the fact that where he comes from. He comes from a long line of rabbis, but
sure, but he's not religious.
He did convert. Yes. And another self-hating Jew.
He was completely hostile to Jews and Judaism. And in his treatise on the Jews, he actually identifies the Jews with capitalism. I discuss this in my book on anti-Semitism. He completely makes a one-to-one comparison, a one-to-one likening of the Jews to capitalists. The Jews are the capitalists. And thus, in order to achieve the communist society, he argues, the Jews have to stop being Jews. They have to give up every aspect of their separate identity as Jews and melt into the larger communist proletariat. And thus, the destruction of Judaism and Jews is a core element of his program, which is one reason why Stalin was pursuing the Doctor's Plot, which was an attempt for a large-scale pogrom of the Jews at the time that he died. And this is a little-known aspect of international communism, but it is, I think, a very important one that explains or illuminates the hostility that the left has toward the Jews today. That Marx himself identified them with capitalists, with capitalism, and consequently they have to be done away with. And as I said before, they're the non-assimilable people, and thus for people who are collectivists, who believe in erasing all distinctions between people, even down in Mao's China, down to clothing, and everybody wearing those little uniforms. Israel can't stand in a scenario of that kind.
This is a great segue to start talking about your book, Robert. You've recently published a book, Anti-Semitism, History and Myth. I believe that we share the same publishers. Can you talk about the book, what motivated you to write it? Why should people read it? What is it going to teach us? How is it different from the other books, the several other books that you've written? And what is its relevance during these times?
Well, I'll take that last point first, because in the first place, it's completely different from the other books that I've written. And I can actually say that about all my books, because publishers hate it when you turn in a book that you've already written. It's completely different, though, and seriously, because it's about obviously anti-Semitism, whereas most, but not all, of my earlier books have to do with aspects of Islam and jihad, such as my edition of the Quran, the Critical Quran, biography of Muhammad, a critical biography. What else do I have? The history of jihad and so on. And so this is a complete departure from what I ordinarily write about. And I did it because right after October 7th, there were a couple of people I was in touch with who at that time I admired and respected. And they started repeating ancient anti-Semitic themes to me. Like, for example, I would speak about October 7th, and one guy would tell me that, no, it wasn't really like that. The Israeli government actually killed them all. And where'd you hear that? I would say, and he would say, oh, I heard it on, wherever he heard it. I don't know, Al Jazeera or whatever. And I would
Are
say,
people really that stupid? Are they
yes,
that stupid?
yeah, these are real conversations I had. And I would say, well, this didn't really happen that way, and here are sources that show that. And he would say, well, you can't believe those. That's the Jew-controlled media. And I actually was amazed.
Can't win.
I thought was a reasonable human being, and he actually believed that the Jews control the media. And I think that's the most ridiculous of the anti-Jewish conspiracy theories, because obviously you look at the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, Reuters, AP, all of them, the BBC, they're so hostile to Jews in Israel that if the Jews control the media, they're doing an awfully poor job of it. And anyway, so I was so amazed by the discovery among people that I had known and thought they were sensible of these anti-Semitic ideas. I thought there needs to be a pushback. And so in the book, I show what the sources of anti-Semitism are, how they are still existing today, how they're all at play today, what some of the main claims that they make are and why they're false. And so I hope that this book will serve as a guide to people who may be confused by seeing people they previously trusted and liked, like Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens, people like that, but not just on the right, people on the left as well, and indeed primarily, and as well as Christians and Muslims, that they will see where all this comes from and have a coherent response to it.
Do you think this is that we're back into an era of the scapegoating of the Jew?
Yes, very much so. And so in the book, I quote Solzhenitsyn saying that the dividing line between good and evil is not between one group of people and another. It runs down through every human heart. And that is an elementary, basic observation about human nature, but it's being lost again today as the Jews are being widely scapegoated.
And do you think that that's a volatility that is going to infect where we feel secure? For example, everyone has said Trump is a friend of the Jews. What is it going to take for Trump to no longer be a friend of the Jews?
Well, I don't know. I can't speak for Trump. I find him extremely curious. He's not somebody that you can understand. There are a lot of people, Joe Biden, I think I understood Joe Biden. I understood what he wanted, what made him tick. And so I was never surprised by anything that he did, even when he was shoveling billions to Hamas and Iran after October 7th. I think, one of the few people who were not surprised by that. But Trump, I can't figure out. I share your frustration you enunciated earlier about why it is that he's so strongly pro-Israel. He's been more vocally pro-Israel than any president in history, and then he doesn't do anything, and he issues these empty threats. And I don't understand what he's up to. So I really don't know.
My theory is either he's a madman or he is a brilliant strategist who takes people to the edge, creates complete chaos in order to create new opportunity of creativity and solutions. But it could be a combination of all these things. But I
I
think
do
that your
think he's a
sense,
lot smarter than people give him credit for, and that he seems to be. And
I
that's
hope
on the
so.
basis of the fact that he did things like the Abraham Accords and moving the embassy to Jerusalem and so on. When if he were just completely capricious and completely unprincipled, he never would have taken stands of that kind or had the imagination to think of something like the Abraham Accords when John Kerry and all the foreign policy establishment was saying that was impossible. So you got to give him some credit, but I don't think that he's perfect or infallible either. So I don't really know what he's doing now.
I think your sentiment is shared by many others out there. So back to history and myth, anti-Semitism. Do you think anti-Semitism is in the DNA of people? People often say like, oh, like, it's within their DNA to be anti-Semitic.
No, I don't think that in the slightest degree. But I think that there are dominating ideologies in the world, and there are four primary ones that I discuss in the book that still exist today and give rise to and justify anti-Semitism. And that in terms of DNA on one level, yes, that everybody is suspicious of and dislikes to varying degrees people who are different. Everybody on earth, this is not a racist statement because I'm saying everybody on earth thinks the other people that are different are kind of weird. There's just something not right about them. And maybe they'll never act on that, and maybe they'll never enunciate it, and many would hotly deny it. But I think that it's the reason why people tend to congregate with others who are like them. And that's
Bias,
just human nature.
bias, and prejudice. It's a common trait of maybe what is sort of in the DNA of our humanity.
Yes.
It doesn't help that
Jews, there's a common phenomenon among four large ideologies that do scapegoat.
Can you share that? What are the four ideologies?
Christianity, Islam, National Socialism, and International Socialism. And those are four big ideologies today. I would have thought National Socialism was dead, but as I said earlier, it ain't. And Christianity has repudiated anti-Semitism to a tremendous degree. The Catholic Church, the Orthodox leaders repudiate it. A lot of Protestant leaders repudiate it. And yet there is still a strain of Christian anti-Semitism. Islam has never repudiated it. And International Socialism, it's not even recognized. But those four, in varying ways, they identify the Jews as the people who are not what we are and who ought to be what we are. And they stand in our way of being what we are to the fullest. And that's
do you think it's offensive that people find it offensive that Jews are referred to as the chosen people?
Yes, sure. Absolutely, they do. And of course, they don't understand that, as the Jews understand it, that it's more of a burden than a privilege. And it's not saying that they're better people than anybody else, but there is a widespread idea, I think probably particularly among Christians and Muslims, that this is somehow offensive. Although, of course, Christianity and Islam both take it for granted that it's actually true. As I read you, remember in 62 verse 6, when I read you that from the Quran, did you notice that it says, when it says that the Jews should long for death, it says you claim that you're favored of Allah apart from mankind. That is, you say you're the chosen people above everybody else. Well, then you should love death. And that's part of it. But also it's part of it's the universalist idea. And I think every human group is universalist to varying degrees. Every human group. That's why people are so conformist. It's a funny thing. Have you ever noticed that before there was television, before there was radio, before there were newspapers, you can see there was conformism. There was conformity. That you look at the 18th century, the 17th century, the 16th century, in paintings and drawings from around the world, and people tended to dress in the same way. How the heck did they know? And yet there was a certain amount of travel, and people did come into contact with people from other countries. And so there was a conformism. People they look around and they see, oh,
Do you think anti-Semitism is a momentum of conformity amongst?
it's a manifestation of conformism.
So the majority of people
they look around and they see what people are doing, and they want to do that.
So
and then they've got this people that says, no, we won't. We want to do our own thing. And so they're hated.
So this is what you would call the crowd factor, right? This is yeah.
And
it's a big problem because I mean, I always laugh at some of these spoof videos, but not spoof videos, but these interviews with people who are protesting, and they have absolutely no idea why they're protesting. They have absolutely no which seat.
They're conforming. They want to be the cool people on campus. They want to be in the crowd that everybody looks up to, maybe with a certain amount of fear and awe, and say, look, they're out there taking a stand. They really mean this. Look, they're out there in pup tents for Hamas. They're really hardcore.
These are people that lack purpose. But do you think that conformity, to me, would be a weak link in terms of radicalization, and they're probably the lowest hanging fruit of changing that narrative to educate them? Why? Or do you feel that they're the most dangerous people?
That's what I was saying before. Conformism is a universal human impulse, and it's very strong, and most people don't even realize they're doing it. And I mean, why am I sitting here in a tie? Why do I have this piece of cloth hanging from my neck? Because I am conforming to certain standards of dress and grooming that I imbibed when I was a young man, and that I still think are important. And you're conforming to standards in dress.
I'm an outlier.
You're conforming to you're an outlier to me, maybe, but you're conforming to a different standard. That's all. And the people who are wearing kufis and kaftans over in Saudi Arabia, they're conforming too.
But do you think conformity is like a lifelong commitment, or do you think people can shift in their conformity?
Oh, well, sure, they could change. And when it comes to something like dress, I do a show on most Wednesday nights. I didn't do it last night, but I do it most Wednesday nights, a show called This Week in Jihad with David Wood. And David Wood is a much younger man than I am, and he always comes out wearing a T-shirt. And so it's a little bit of an amusing contrast that I'm always the guy in the tie, and he's in a T-shirt. But I could just as soon as, next week start wearing T-shirts, and he could start wearing ties. That sort of thing is easy. But when it comes to conformism that you don't even realize you're doing, and that you're imbibing ideas that are in the air, it's very hard to shake yourself out of them. You have to first understand that they're happening and decide that maybe another set of ideas is preferable. And that does happen. There are converts from one ideology to another, from one religion to another, all over the world all the time. I used to be a communist myself, but it's a difficult thing to do for one reason, because you have to reject your social group and stop being a conformist, which is very hard.
I think what I've had the most difficulty with over my career and kind of growing up when I was going through university, I was very much center left. I naively and I'm still maybe naive, in my innocence, to the extent that I'm a humanist, and I want to believe that people have an opportunity to love, and that people want to respect life, and that ultimately life is everything. And this is often challenged by the reality of what's going on. But idealistically, I want to believe that people, it makes sense to work hard and to find the best way to live, and for others to do so, and that people and we transfer on how other people would feel. And I think one of the biggest problems that we've got out there with Islam is the fact that we project our own belief system. We project how we would live.
We project and I think our own proclivities, our own desires onto Muslims, instead of studying what they say to each other and accepting what they think on its own terms. And that's been the basis of all my work ever since I started publishing books. Actually, before that, I'm the guy who is the bigoted, racist hate monger. And yet I'm actually the guy who respects Muslims enough to take them on their own terms and at their own word, and not to
Pretty
project
powerful.
my own Western values on them, and not to
That's
assume that they think the way I think, but instead to try to figure out what they actually think. So I actually respect Muslims more than the people who call me nasty names for what I do.
well. You have my respect. I mean, you're a candid guy. You're obviously extremely educated, and you've done some tremendous work out there. And I think that I think ringing the bell and calling out, it's. I talk about in one of my books. I talk about the emperor. I talk about the story of the emperor's not wearing any clothes until one child yells out in the crowd, "Hey, the emperor's naked!" And I think that's what you're doing out there, Robert. And I think that's great stuff. And Anti-Semitism, History and Myth, available on Amazon.
Yes, it is.
And Amazon will not allow us to market our books on October 7th. I cannot get my book, The Wake Up Call. They have their censorship of some kind. It says they don't allow. There's a lot of censorship out there, and
Yes,
it's really an uphill battle. It's really an uphill battle. I mean, aside from the fact that people suffer from extreme ADD and that there is frame per second sort of over information coming into our youth, and people sort of become more followers. They're definitely, I think we definitely have a lack of individuality out there, and there's far more crowd, if you will, conformity than ever before. And then on top of that, we're being censored. We're being censored for being able to talk our minds. And here are the, sort of left, illiberal, liberal supporters of free speech and protectors of civil liberties, and yet they are censoring information when it doesn't agree and it's not palatable to them. Well, shame on them. And what can I say? I mean, I'm actually sounding like, shame on them. But really, it's horrible because I don't know what else to say. What other words can encapsulate the clarity of how I feel about this?
When you say shame on them, you are reflecting the power of conformism. You are saying they have strayed from the group, and they ought to feel ashamed for doing so and return to the group. But they might be members of a different group.
I believe that there are certain things, Robert, and I don't know if you'd agree with me, that are inherent to humanity. And I talk about the story of Cain and Abel, and about when the murdering of a brother, and that when God yells out that, what did you do? I'm not my brother's keeper. Obviously, he's defensive right away. He realizes and recognizes that he committed murder, and murder is wrong. And ultimately, with whatever it is, whether it's an ideology, whether it's a religion, I cannot believe that any sane individual can say that it's okay to murder, because it certainly isn't okay to take a life. And in every religion, God is made it very clear from the beginning of time, and we see this in the Bible. And we know inherently, we know that this is morally wrong. You don't have to be taught certain things, and you can hide behind conformity and hide behind. But people that were complacent in the Holocaust, they were still judged for their actions of complacencies and apathy. And I believe in the future and in history. And I talk about a conversation I had with this gentleman from Germany and Thailand. At the end of my book, I talk about healing with respect to October 7th. And he said,
how many times the Quran tells Muslims to kill unbelievers?
I still want to recognize that, and that's my own dissonance, I guess, Robert. I don't want to know that. I don't want to know that anything out there is going to go ahead and justify, rationalize, encourage, or institutionalize the idea of taking the life of another person.
Do you remember the guy on October 7th who called his mom and said, "I'm so happy I'm calling you from the dead Jew's phone. I've killed 10 Jews today." Remember that?
Yes.
All right. Where does that come from? It comes from Islam. He thought that he was right and righteous in killing Jews because the Quran says kill them wherever you find them. It repeats it. It emphasizes that these people are the worst enemies of the Muslims, which the Jews are called in chapter 5, verse 82 of the Quran. It says that they're under the curse of Allah. They're always interfering with the Muslims when they're trying to do what's good and right. And so
I'm gonna say something now, Robert, that's probably gonna get me in trouble. But I think the biggest flaw with the Quran is I do not believe that it has a divine deliverance.
well, no, of course not. But the
Believe it
problem
is
is that they believe it does. And
This is
the
a big
Hamas
problem.
killers believe it does. And they think that it means
All right.
that what it says is that what they do when they kill Jews is something that they will be rewarded for by Allah.
So how do we deal with the lovers of death, Robert?
Well,
How are we going
one
to deal
way
with it?
is to try to deal with Islam and to either convince them not to be Muslims or convince them to reject these aspects of Islam. But by pretending these aspects of Islam don't exist, we're not going to get anywhere because they understand that these aspects of Islam exist. They are acting upon them. And by
We are in a
pretending it's not
very
the case,
difficult,
they're just
we're
listening in.
in a tenuous situation. We're in a tenuous situation, Robert. And there's either violence, there's subjugation, there is trying to change the narrative by forcing a certain educational curriculum. There's influence. There's complacence. There's, conformity. What are we going to do to protect ourselves in our homes, in our cities, in our neighborhoods, in our playgrounds, in our schools? Ultimately, it's coming for us. What are we going to do to protect ourselves from the lovers of death?
That's why I'm talking to you today, my friend. This is why I'm doing everything I'm doing. I'm trying to raise awareness about a threat that most people are ignoring. And most people are not even aware as a threat. And it is going to come to us. We need to be prepared. We can't be prepared until we recognize
what is it?
exists.
When you say we should be prepared, Robert, someone is listening to this podcast right now and he's hearing the two of us talk about this. What would your advice to that person, that auto worker, that bank teller, that educator, that student, that individual? What is the answer? What do you think that they should do to battle the lovers of death?
Take responsibility for your own freedom. Nobody's going to fight this battle for you. You have to become an activist. You say, I don't have time. Okay, then it's going to come upon you. It's going to come upon you whether you have time or not. So make time and go out. Make sure that you are advocating for politicians and for laws that will protect you and your people and your nation and not increase the threats to them. Make sure that you understand the parameters of the conflict so that you know which politician, which laws to advocate for. I am talking about entirely peaceful, legal activity, but we need to all become activists. This is a war, but it's not a war the soldiers are going to fight for us while we sit at home.
Apathy is not the answer. Complacency is not the answer. We got to stop burying our heads in the ground. People like me, who I've spent 30 years in a career of building this business in software, real estate, in investments and other things. And then one day I woke up and I realized that I needed to get the world to wake up. And I wrote this book, The Wake Up Call. I'm not a author like my friend Robert Spencer here. I hope you don't mind me calling you my friend. I'm not a prolific speaker. I'm not as knowledgeable and as well trained. I will admit this straight up. But I know one thing, Robert, something is diseased in this world. Something is wrong. We are forced to confront our moral compass, and we are forced to make choices and do things that I never thought we would have to be. I grew up with the disillusion that never again was simply a response by people to rationalize one of the worst times in human history, and that it would never happen again, because how could humanity allow it? I wanted to say as a little point, when I went to
when I was younger and I went to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, I'll never forget seeing a picture of wartime Germany, a black and white picture where there was a streetcar, and there was I believe that there. My apologies, and I believe that there. My son is calling me. My apologies. And I believe, and I saw this streetcar, and I saw this scene, and I think I saw the Woolworths building, and it was or in a bag of shoes, and it was like, wow, this is modern society, and yet society allowed the Holocaust to happen, and but yet I couldn't allow myself. I grew up in this insulated environment of consumerism, of kind of the prompted by the Beavers, the show, where we all sort of led our lives, went out to work, and the American dream. And little did I realize that in the background, we were just living in this glass dome of disillusionment. And then October 7th happens. And it wasn't October 7th that shattered me. It was October 8th that shattered me. Seeing this tidal wave, this tsunami, this tidal wave of anti-Semitism that just was like, obviously it was planned beforehand. Obviously all of this was defined. And it just made me so angry and scared and fearful. So to your point, you could either make a choice to live in fear and close your door and watch your Netflix and whatever else you do to consume your brain and to placate you, why people are, and wait until you're not even waiting because you don't believe it that they'll knock on your door, they'll come for you, but they will come for you. The global jihad is here. I talk about it in my book. Robert, you've talked about it in your books. It's a reality, and we've got to face that reality. We're going to close up over here, Robert, but I want to just say a couple more things and just get your thoughts on something. We talked about the impossible situation that we're in, the dilemma that we are in the sense that governments are going to have to find the agency to implement legislation in order to provide the police mechanism to stop what is obviously inherently immoral. And there's just in Canada, in Toronto alone, we laid 450 charges. The police laid 450 charges, 0 convictions, which tells me that they're in the frustration. I talked to the chief of police office, and the guy told me in tears that they don't even have the mechanism to bring things to the courts. And now with another liberal government, it's just going to get even worse in Toronto. I mean, and it's going to get a lot worse because people aren't calling it out. They're afraid to call it out. It's not politically correct to call it out, but we got to call it for what it is. We got to make people aware. So my point is that in my seventh observation to the question of how October 7th happened, because this is on the mind of many, many people in the world, and Jews and outside the echo chamber. I mean, one of the most powerful militaries in the world, most sophisticated people, if you will, $2 billion invested in a border system. There's all sorts of things, but at the end of the day, on my seventh observation, I talk about disunity. I talk about polarization. And when Moses brought the people of Israel to the border of Canaan, which was to become the nation of Israel as a nation, Moses made a very, very plain prediction or warning. Respect each other, and you will be blessed. Disrespect each other, and you will be cursed. Your enemies will notice. There's been a lot of polarization, not just in Israel, but the polarization and the political unsettlement has breached into all Western society. You can't find a good leader today. It's just a terrible job for anyone, given what happens to them once they become the leader. Leadership is good leaders are very hard to find today. We've seen that. But it's the disunity of people, and I just pray that people can recognize that we got to try to become unified. We got to try to respect each other again. People have to stop the hate. They need more of the love. And it's just this: our enemies are watching, and I think perhaps that might be the greatest threat, is our own disunity, because that is what our enemies are looking forward to. God help us if Shiite and if Sunnis find a way to cooperate in lasting cooperation.
They're already working
1.8
together.
one-
On
1.8
months.
they're going to take us, and too many people to overcome will overcome the sheer numbers. So we really need to come together, and hopefully we will. Robert, any closing remarks that you've got based on what we've talked about today?
Very important.
What would you tell people? What's your message?
There are things that are facts that people don't want to face. And that's true as a society. Once again, there's a certain conformism involved also, that the only people who say these facts are people who are already demonized and stigmatized in a very skillfully executed effort in order to keep people from acknowledging these truths. So dare to embrace the truth, as difficult as it may be. Grasp the nettle, understand what we're dealing with. We can't really face this conflict without understanding it properly. And so that will take us, unfortunately, straight into the religion of Islam. We have to understand it in order to deal with it properly. That's what I do in all my books. I hope that if you don't read my books, you will at least educate yourselves in other ways so that you understand this problem correctly and be able to deal with it adequately as a result. Otherwise, there's no way. We cannot defeat an enemy that we keep fantasizing and pretending is other than what it is.
Robert, thank you so much.
Thank
Very
you.
much appreciate you joining me today.
Thank you.
We've heard hard truths today, truths many would rather ignore. But as we've seen, the cost of denial is too high. Anti-Semitism is rising. Jihadist ideology is spreading. And the free world is at a crossroads. This is not just Israel's fight, it's everyone's fight. And if we stay silent, history will not be kind to us. Robert Spencer, thank you for your clarity, your courage, and your relentless voice in the wilderness. And to everyone listening, if this conversation moved you, disturbed you, or made you think, don't just nod along. Take action. Click below and like this podcast. Follow the Unfiltered View, and please share this podcast. Feel free to comment. I want to hear from you, and I want to learn. Visit IsraelEllis.com to register so we can stay connected. The time for sleep is over. The messages are ringing loud and clear. The question is, will we answer it? I'm Israel Ellis, and this has been The Unfiltered View. My name is Israel Ellis, and this is The Unfiltered View, a companion to the wake-up call. This is where truth breaks through the noise.